Good morning, everyone. Actually, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to another one of our talks in our series. Today, we have a very interesting topic. We have the miracle of happiness, Jesus's first miracle. And who's going to bring it to us is Dr. Dan Assisi. Hi, Dan. How are you?
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So then let's talk a little bit about you. You have a very extensive. So if you allow me, usually I don't do this, but if you allow me, I'm going to read your bio verbatim because it is quite interesting. So let us just read it verbatim. So Dennis Sissi is an award-winning author and internationally celebrated speaker who has delivered hundreds of talks and conferences on spirituality in over 60 cities on 4 continents. Known for a mix of deep thinking and witty humor, Dan takes a unique approach to spirituality that is steeped in reason to remind audiences everywhere of our spiritual nature. Dr. Sisi is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute and of the California Spiritist Association. You can also find him as a host of the Spiritist Conversations podcast. Daniel holds a doctorate degree in education and a master's degree in public administration with a graduate certificate in public policy from the University of Southern California. All right, Dan, those are your credentials. And again, welcome and thank you for bringing to us such an interesting topic. As always, for us to start, I would like to say our initial prayer, and then after that, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity that we have this morning to have such an interesting conversation about Jesus' legacy, about his teachings, especially those that deal with making the best of our circumstances and learning and extracting the best lessons from our experiences. Bless and inspire our lecturer this morning and bless all of us who will be watching it either live or after the fact as a recording speech, so that we can also understand and internalize the best points of the message. May your peace be with us always. So be it. Dr. Sisi, you have the floor.
Thank you for your kind words, friend. I really appreciate it. At the end of the day, I'm just like you and anybody else who may be watching. I am just a guy trying to make sense of the world around us and find a way of living better through our difficult times. And what I wanted to do today, if you're up for it, is to have a conversation about happiness and about our times and how we can actually spend some time going back to these wonderful lessons that our older brother Jesus has left us to make sense of how can we actually bring happiness into our lives. And with that, I'm actually going to ask for your indulgence. I have two young children. It's early here in California, and you might hear them in the background, and they might be the perfect manifestation of what is it to be happy in the morning. So if you hear some squeaks and peeps, and I invite you to feel the joy. I can't control the volume on that one, and thank you for your patience. Right. But thank you very much for having me. It is truly, really a blessing to be able to have some time off our schedules to converse a little bit about happiness. We know that we have had very difficult times lately. We know that in the past couple of years, we've been in the thralls of a pandemic. But even before then, we know that we were struggling with racial justice, inequity, political polarization, where we are having trouble talking to each other, um, and all that fun stuff, which has not actually been very fun at all, right? We know that we have wars on the horizon right now, the Ukraine, we have Yemen, we have economic challenges in different places. Um, we have all these kind of challenges in general, right? Um, so, so what do we do with all this, right? What do we really make of all this? Because it's understandable that in the middle of all these pandemics, war, violence, inequity, economic troubles for folks, is that what the world really is? How do we handle all of this? And what kind of messages can we learn? Because if we are just looking at the material world, I understand how people can get very frustrated, can get very bogged down. But what we hope to do today is have a little bit of a different insight and go back to an authority in happiness, which is Jesus Christ. And what we want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the first miracle that Jesus brought us, the miracle of turning water into wine, which is something that we find in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And what's really great here is that this is the first miracle that Jesus does in the New Testament. Of all the 34 miracles that we find in the New Testament, that second part of the Christian Bible that tells us about the coming of the Christ, this is, chronologically speaking, the first one. It only appears in the Gospel of John, one of the 4 Gospels that we find there. And we know that sometimes folks also know this as the wedding at Cana, right? And Cana was a city in obviously, in the Middle East at that time, that it's not necessarily well placed today. We don't exactly know where Cana was, but it doesn't really matter, because I think the symbolism behind it is just really wonderful in general. So we're going to take some time to talk about that. We're going to read those 10 different verses or so, and then we are going to see if they hold any symbolism for us. And that comes, by the way, from the New International Version of Translations of the Bible. I know there's many different ones, but this one is simple to understand and read. And I hope you will indulge me as we read through it, and then we try to make sense of things. All right, you ready? All right, so let's do this. The wedding at Cana. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." But his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it into the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet, the head waiter, if you will, the maître d', tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where he had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. All right, so that's our story right there, right? Probably not surprising to us. We might have heard it before. Jesus was at a wedding with Mary and his disciples. They run out of wine, and his mother pushes him to it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And he performs this miracle, right? The first one that we see, which is turning water into wine. And then the water is taken to the folks at the party, and they drink it, and they realize that even this new wine is even better than the original wine. And that was quite incredible. But why does that matter to us? Well, let's pick things apart and see if we can find some similarities to our times. All right, so we start here with this idea that in the first verses, we are told that Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples, they all have been invited to the wedding. And as you know, weddings are a big deal, right? We know that it takes planning. It's an important and beautiful ceremony and moment and milestone in our lives. But what I find really interesting here is that Jesus' mother was there and his disciples were also there, which means this is a wedding of people that were close to them, that they knew who they were, because you just wouldn't invite random people to your wedding, right? So the fact that Jesus' mother was there and his disciple was there, it tells us that this is somebody close to them getting married. And I think that's a really great piece, because in many different ways, I think this whole miracle begins with setting the stage here that we are all into this wedding. This is the wedding of people who we know. We are close to each other, all of us, right? And a wedding is also an important thing because it's a covenant. It's a binding agreement. It's a dedication that we have to someone else. And so in many different ways, I take this first verse to talk to us about our human condition as incarnate spirits that we know so well in Spiritism here on earth. And that is, we are all part of this joyous, momentous occasion to be together with people that we know, to celebrate our connection to each other. Sometimes we forget that, but that's what life in many ways is about, is an invitation for us to celebrate our togetherness, our fact that we're here. And so I love that our story begins right there, saying that this is something that's not foreign, not distant, not far away. This is something that relates to us, you and I, every day as part of our lives. And I love the way that starts. It just brings us in, I think. But what else? What else can we learn from this wonderful little story that we find in the New Testament? Well, what I think is really interesting is that Jesus' mother, Mary, turns to Jesus and says, they have no more wine. And it's a plea, right? As in, do something about it. They have no more wine. But why is that significant to us as well? Well, I think we all know that in a wedding, in a party, food and wine are a way of people to connect and be with each other, to spend time with each other. And Mary realizes that this party has run out of wine. Now, can we agree that that's a good thing? Because here's what I'm thinking. If this was really a raucous party with a lot of people drunk, falling over tables or fighting, when you run out of wine, that's a blessing. You said, run out of wine, everybody home, right? But this was not the case. Because we know it was a wedding of people that knew each other, that were close to them, it must have been a wonderful atmosphere. They were really enjoying themselves. And when the wine was ending, Mary felt sad that that moment wouldn't be prolonged, that that moment of joy and togetherness would come to an end, because once you run out of wine and food in a party, generally people leave. And so in the moment is her heart speaking and longing for more and longing for assistance, so that that joy can be preserved. And I think it's a beautiful symbolism for us as well, because what does it mean to have this joy prolonged? What is it that we really should consider? And why has the wine ran out? Well, weddings are very important, right? So you do plan your weddings. It's not that they just didn't think about how many people were going to be there. It's not that they just counted wrong, because they have a whole party. They have a waiter serving the party, right? So it's really a party. So I like to think that the reason why the wine ran out is because they were really enjoying themselves, and maybe they opened their hearts to additional guests and they just didn't have enough. Things were going so well that they didn't have enough. And what I love about this is that in many different ways, it kind of resembles, I think, our lives here too. You know, we've been together in this incarnation. We've been enjoying each other's company, but there are moments in our collective histories, or even on our personal journeys, where we run out of wine. We run out of that fuel of sorts that lets us feel and be happy. Can you relate? I think that the world is in this place where we are running out of wine. where we are struggling now to find the joy and to find that commonality amongst us. We've had a pandemic that sometimes brought the worst of us out. We certainly have wars right now that are definitely not a reflection of who we want to be. We have discrimination everywhere. We are running out of wine. We are forgetting the joy of being human, alive, and being connected to each other. So I think that Mary's plea for more wine is a spiritual plea here, is a request to the heavens, so to speak, to the enlightened spirits, to give us something so that we may continue this joyous party that we are meant to enjoy. And so it's more than about wine. It's about happiness and joy. And that's how it all starts. And that's our point for today. That the first miracle, Jesus' first big doing, was really to remind us, tune back into our joys, our happiness. And so how do we do that? How do we bring that joy, that wine, so to speak, symbolically speaking, into our lives? Well, let's try to make our way here. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied. That's the reply of Jesus. And that's an interesting reply on of itself, right? Because in it, Jesus is saying, but hold on a second. I have nothing to do with this. This is not my doing. This is not my time to show people what I can do. You're asking me for something that I don't really should be engaged. I wasn't planning on getting engaged right now. And it's very important for us to also take a quick pause here and say that the word woman here, it's not derogatory, it's not pejorative, it's just a figure of speech that was used traditionally in the time. Yes, the society of that time was very chauvinist. We all agree with that, right? We all know that. But I think we can also agree that Jesus was very tender and kind and loving to his mother. So don't read anything into the word woman here other than say, hey, but mother, why do you involve me? This is not my time. Because remember, this is being the first miracle. He had not yet done any other kinds of miracles out there. He wasn't really out in the open, so to speak, about all the incredible things that he could do. And that's really interesting because Mary, in her heart, already knew what he could do. She was obviously with him for a very long time, and she raised him. So she knew that there was something special there. Her relationship to Christ told her that even though he had not done public miracles yet, there was something that he could do. So she turned to him, and he said, are you sure? Is that what you really want? Should I interfere here? This wasn't planned. And you know what happens next, right? I think we all do. His mother, very feistily in a very great way, doesn't take a no for an answer. She turns to the servants that were working the party and she says, do whatever he tells you. She is not taking a no for an answer. She is going to run interference for us. She is going to help those people be happy, and she is going to be sure that that takes place. And so when she does that, I think that there is a greater symbolism here that is a beautiful one in many different ways, which is there are people interfering for us, for our happiness, all the time, even when we don't think about it, and even when we don't consider it. And in Spiritism, we have learned that we have spiritual friends and colleagues and parents from this life, from many lives before, and our spiritual benefactors, and they are constantly looking out for us as well and asking for us so that we may be given an opportunity to continue in this life, to move forward. And they don't take a no for an answer. Their plea comes from their heart. So in many different ways, I think the symbolism of Mary turning to Jesus to ask for help with the wine has a lot to do with how we constantly have help from the spiritual world asking on our behalf to God, to Christ, to our benefactors, to give us what we need to continue to have a productive, joyous, and enjoyable existence so that we can learn and grow. And that's a fascinating piece, because sometimes I think we forget that there are many people working on our behalf in the spiritual world, helping us out. We feel so lonely. We feel so forgotten sometimes. And I think we all can relate a little bit to that after these years of pandemic, after the challenges of everyday life, and the solitude some of us were feeling even before the pandemic. We are not alone. And we can talk a little bit more about that later on as well. But they are there for us. They are always intervening for us. So I wonder, who is it that in your spiritual life, in this very moment, is directing their love to you? Who is it that is sending you love, asking for help for you? We may not know, but we do know that they are there. This story tells us that even though people who are at the party, and that's us in a way, they don't know what's happening over here on the side, but they do know later that the wine shows up. And that's an important lesson as well. At the risk of spending too much time in different topics, we're going to move on so that you don't get tired of us. After all, we have a miracle to perform here today together, right? Understanding this way of doing things. So his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. And what do we learn here after that? And here's an interesting piece to it as well. This little story tells us that nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. Why do we care? Why do we care about the pots and the jars and the buckets? I think there's another symbolism for us here too that's interesting for us to explore in this time of ours. And what is it? What is it, Dan? Hold your horses. Let's think about this. So there were 6 stone water jars, and these water jars, they were used for ceremonial washing. And it was a custom of the Jewish people at that time to do the ceremonial washing in special occasions. They would put water in there, and then they would wash their hands. Sometimes they would wash their bodies. Women would cleanse themselves as well. So I think that the symbolism of the water jars, it's a really beautiful one, because it's not just about drinks. It's about cleansing and purification. Do you see where I'm going here? The fact that those stone water jars were used for cleansing and purification before, it's also a big sign that this miracle that Jesus is bringing to us, this wine that he's speaking about, that he's going to create, and we don't know yet at this point of the story, it's also about ceremonial washing, but in a different way than we think about before. So this wine that Jesus is bringing to us is not a wine for splashing outside of yourself, for cleansing, materially speaking. This wine that he's going to produce in these incredibly large stone water jars, there's 20, 30 gallons a piece, right? So we're talking about a lot of wine here for a party. It's meant to be consumed internally. So this wine is going to come inside of us. And I wonder if this happiness that we're talking about, this miracle that we are referring to, is not one of happiness for the outside world. It's not about us being happy with the cars we have, the homes we have, the clothes we have. It's not us getting stuff. It's about getting the nourishment to change our souls, to change our habits, our attitudes, the way we go about the world. Drinking this wine is about changing ourselves. At the end of the day, I like saying this because I think it's so true. The stories that we find in the Bible, in the New Testament, are all about change. And that's why I like to call it the book of change. I like to call the New Testament the book of change, because it's all about changing yourselves. So this miracle that's going to take place, this extra joy, this extra fuel that Jesus, or this learning is going to bring to us, is one that's going to cleanse us and transform us internally. That is actually profound in its own way. And let's be clear here too, friends. At 6 stone water jars with 20 to 30 gallons apiece, maybe even more, that's a lot of wine. There's a lot of cleansing that we both have to be done, that we have to do and enjoy. So there is enough for all of us to go ahead and transform ourselves with, to enjoy cleanse ourselves, to change and shift the way we see the world and the times around us, which, let's be honest, it's not a bad thing this day and age, right? When we are feeling so distraught about life in general, changing the way we see the world and arriving at the place where we are happier with ourselves and the world around us will do us a lot of good. But let's not dwell here too much, because time is always limited. What else can we learn? And here's something interesting. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the waters with jar," so they filled them to the brim. And here's why I think this is such an interesting passage and has so much for us to learn from, because we know in the story that this incredible spirit, Jesus, who's perfect in many ways, spiritually speaking, that are hard for us to understand, the story tells us that he has transformed water into wine. So clearly, he's got an ability and understanding of things that we have not yet figured out. And if he transformed water into wine, he could have also snapped his fingers and probably just filled those jars by himself, right? So why is it that he turns to the servants and he says, fill the jars with water? And I think that's where the educator part of him comes in. And I think that is message saying, yes, I will take you past the finish line when you can't do things. If you don't have wine, I will help you get there. But you have to bring something. You have to make an effort. You have to start something. You have to fill the jars with water. I will transform it into wine, because you can't do that just yet by yourself. You need some help until you figure that out. But this part you can do, and you must do. And I think I like that very much, because sometimes we complain about the world, we say that things are horrible, and yet we don't move to do anything else. We just wait for Jesus, figuratively speaking, for his spirituality, for the spiritual world, to transform water into wine without bringing anything of ourselves. But I think that this passage here, this verse tells us that it will not happen unless we bring our water. We may know how to solve the entire problem. We may know how to make wine, but Jesus is asking, whatever it is that you can do, do it. Because once you do it, and once you set yourselves in motion, then spirituality will come and will take you all the way through. But we must bring our own contribution. And in this day and age, as we are saying, what is our contribution? What is the water that we are bringing to the table? Are we, in our everyday lives, doing our best to be that change that we want to see, as Gandhi so eloquently exposed? Are we bringing a little bit of joy into the world? Are we making our effort to make this world a better place? Or are we in a moment where we are just nagging and complaining about things? That's a tough question, because I understand that the atmosphere of negativity draws us down sometimes. And it's so easy for us to just fall into that place of everything sucks. But this verse tells us that for the miracle to happen, for things to change, for us to get that extra fuel, we've got to put a little bit of skin in the game. We've got to do our part. We've got to bring the water. So that's a beautiful invitation from this passage. Let's bring water into the world and let the rest take its course, which means we'll get wine eventually, but we got to bring the water. All right. And what else do we learn here? Well, here's an interesting piece as well that I think it's familiar to us in Spiritism, but it begs for remembrance every once in a while. The master of the banquet, the chief waiter, the maître d', the guy who was running the party from the commercial side of things, let's say, tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And why is this interesting? It's interesting because those who are bringing us the water, those who are close to us and trying to provide for our joy, sometimes don't even know where that came from, because it came from so far away, from so higher up, that they are unaware of its origin. And it doesn't matter really, right, where it came from in a way, because if it's there for us, we should enjoy it. But I think a hidden message here is that even the spiritual helpers who are around us may not fully understand the beauty and the mercy of God in its entirety. It's coming from this joy, this wine, this help, the support, this love is coming from above. And sometimes we don't even know where it comes from. We're not even aware that there is this large number of people working in our favor, working towards us. And we forget this, right? And we talk briefly about this, and it's always great to repeat. There is such an amount of love for us out there that we ignore the magnitude of it all. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because we all have been through a difficult pandemic. We all have been through difficult times in our lives, right? And during that moment, we all feel alone. We all feel sad. We all feel like we don't know what's happening. But once we bring the Spiritist understanding that we have acquired through the times in our studies, once we realize that reincarnation is a fact of life, of the universe, and that we are immortal spirits, that we have lived many lives before this one and will live many lives after this one in our trajectory to learning and growth, we must also arrive at another understanding that we sometimes don't think of, which is, if I am that immortal spirit with many lifetimes under my belt, I also have met and interacted and been with different parents, with different partners, friends, siblings, co-workers, and all those people are still connected to us, because after all, when somebody that we care about passes away, dies, or as we like to say in Spiritism, discarnates, leaves the physical body, we don't stop loving them, do we? Our relationship to them doesn't end there. We miss them, we feel like they're gone, but the truth is, we are still loving them. And what we often forget to consider is that they are still loving us too, because just because we don't see them doesn't mean that they're not there. We've learned this. And how do we learn this? We learn this through mediumship. We are able to talk to our friends who have left their physical bodies. In Spiritism, that's a big part of the core of what we do. We talk to them in our mediumistic meetings. We read messages they've written to us. We read books that they've written to us. Some of us see them. Some of us hear them. So we do not and cannot ignore the fact that life goes on. And if life goes on, love goes on. And so just because we don't realize where the wine comes from doesn't mean that there aren't a great number of people sending us love. And it's important for us to hold on to that. So you have an army of love at your back right now. People from your previous lives that you may not recall because you're constantly, you are temporarily here, forgetting about your previous lives for a good reason. But they're there and they're loving you. And so the fact that we don't realize where this love comes from doesn't take away from that love, doesn't take away from that opportunity. So pardon me here. There's a beautiful chain of connections here, right? If you think about it, Mary asks Jesus, who then asks the servants to take the wine to the master waiter, who then takes it to the bridegroom, who then sees all about this. So there is a long connection of people who are working here so that us, the invitees to this party, can enjoy this joy. There's a lot of work going on because they care about us. There's a lot of work going on in the world right now too, because the spirits care about us too. It's important for us to remember that and not forget. And not forget that although the world seems like it's really struggling, it's really not. It's under control. It's temporary growing pains. They're hard, but they're good ones, and we are going to get through this for sure. We were made for this. And what else do we learn, Dan? Because you're babbling quite a bit on that slide. Well, let's move forward a little bit and also see that there's more here. And I think this is really interesting. This is when the waiter turns to the bridegroom, right? Because he thinks it was the groom who had ordered this wine and had it come, because he doesn't know where it's coming from. He thinks it's coming from right in front of him. He thinks it's from the groom, and the groom has no idea. But because sometimes we fail to consider the spiritual, we think that the things that happen in our lives are down to luck, are down to our own doing or to somebody else's doing, and we fail to recognize the spiritual. But what he tells us that everybody brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine when people have had a little bit more to drink and they can't tell what's what. But you have saved the best till now. And it must have been a surprise to the groom because he was not aware. He doesn't know. So he's getting a compliment here from a waiter for something that he didn't do. But the message here is really powerful and it's really interesting. And what is this message? Well, in a party, in a world, what do? We generally bring our best wine first. And then when people have drank a little bit and they can't tell anything else, we give them the cheap stuff, right? But Jesus' miracle here, that one that's going to cleanse us, is slightly different. See, it's not about the wine of first impressions. It is about the wine, as we have been saying, of spiritual transformation. And I take it to mean that there's deep symbolism here, because it's not about what we first experience in life that is really the best of it. It's what comes after. It's that learning and understanding that we are more than this physical body. That the true joy that fulfills us and will sustain us and will make us truly happy is not the joy of the physical world, which seems to come first when we are incarnating. No. It is the second wine, this deeper wine, this more delicious wine that comes from us, understanding that we are spiritual beings who will never stop being. Let that sink in for a second. I think the invitation of happiness here is to shift ourselves to the idea that we as spiritual beings are temporarily here. But this is not who we are. We will survive all of this because we have survived all the challenges we have ever faced before in our spiritual lives. We have survived 100% of our toughest days because the Spirit never ends. The Spirit never stops being. You and I will never stop being. We are just going to continue to grow, to love, and joy and perfection of sorts. So this second wine is something that is interesting for us to kind of double click on and talk about, because it has a lot to do with us coming to terms with our spiritual selves. Mental health in many different ways is about us realizing that as immortal spirits that we are going to be okay. We were made for this. We were born in this place and time because we are capable of facing these challenges. Otherwise, God would not have put us here. Because if we were not able to handle this and to give our contribution to the world, then this would be a mean God. And God, by definition, is not mean. So the fact that we are here means that we have a contribution to make. But what else? What else can we learn? I mean, I think that's all nice from a spiritual perspective. But are there things that we can also bring to our lives? Yes. Let's bring that certainty to our life. But there's something else that we want to talk about too when it comes to happiness, because we are spiritual beings who are temporarily in a physical body. So we also want to talk about the effects of happiness or lack thereof in our physical bodies, because that's a component as well. So we're going to shift our gears a little bit here to a little bit of a scientific piece, because Spiritism invites us to do that, to consider the symbolism of things, the spiritual component of things, but also look into what is it that we learn from observing the physical world and how we act with it. And what do we see here? We see that if we are to look at the science of stress in general, we notice that when we are stressed, there is this hormone that is produced by our bodies called cortisol. And what this hormone does, it does something wonderful that really helps us, and even historically as well. It enhances the brain's use of glucose, energy, right? And so when it does that, it it gives us an edge to survive physical challenges that we've had in the past. For example, imagine that you are walking in the middle of a wood, and all of a sudden a tiger jumps out in front of you, and all of a sudden you are scared for your life, right? And in that moment, your body starts to produce cortisol. And cortisol then makes the brain be able to use more energy and glucose to figure out how you're going to deal with that problem. And what it does, it starts to kind of beef up your body, puts it in overdrive a little bit, so that in case you're bitten by the tiger, it can repair itself more quickly. It can be prepared for a fight or flight situation where it needs more energy to either run away or to kind of fight and figure things out, right? Which is very helpful from a physical perspective when you are fighting a tiger. It has served us well historically, right? To produce conditions in which we can maintain our physical life, we can be alive, we can survive. However, there is a price here, and this is an interesting piece that's important for us to talk about as well. What it also does is that it curbs functions that are not important to anything else. So in that moment, when you are facing that tiger, nothing else around you registers, right? You don't remember the path that you were walking down in. You don't remember the beautiful flowers you've just seen, the butterfly that was, beautifully floating around, the wonderful blue skies, or the pond that you saw about a mile back. All that goes away from your perspective. All that goes away from your mind in that moment, because you just have to focus in that thing that's in front of you, that challenge. And the world has kind of been doing that to us, hasn't it? If we overdo this, if we are constantly stressed, if we're constantly worried about things, it takes a toll on us. We are unable to see the big picture. We focus just on the suffering and pain. So it's no surprise that when we read the newspaper, our attention is grabbed by COVID challenges, war challenges, and things are going wrong. It's our bodies are helping us focus on those challenges, because they don't recognize that these are not physical challenges anymore, right? They don't recognize that these challenges are not going to kill you in the moment. It's just a stress process that's building up. So part of our journey of realizing happiness is also understanding how our body works, and that if we are constantly under the effect of cortisol and stress, it will also not help us, because it will get us stuck in the mindset of only seeing what's in front of us, which is not the spiritual, it's only the material, and be stuck on that negativity and frustration that is so commonly present in our times. And so what we have to figure it out here now is exactly what we are going to do once we have that knowledge. Now that we are beginning to understand that we are immortal beings who are under a task, a learning process here in the physical world, and that our bodies are trying to help us at times by producing cortisol for us to focus stress, but that we can dial it down. How do we combine the spiritual and the physical? And what are we going to do from here on? Now that we know that we are spiritual beings, and now that we know that we can help reprogram our bodies in a way to be less affected by cortisol so that we can see the bigger picture, what are the things that we could do? And I think that's the key question, because we forget. We forget that we are immortal spirits. Imagine if we had a chance every morning for a minute or so, or maybe 30 seconds, just to recall that we are immortal spirits temporarily vesting a physical body for the purpose of growing and learning. And that God has put us here because we have something to learn and something to give. And that everything that we face is going to be figured out in one way or another, because there is a God. And that our role is to bring something to this, to bring our water, so to speak, and to help that joy continue. I think that is a powerful lesson that sometimes we forget. And I think in many ways, That's the invitation that lingers from Jesus, for us to understand that there is more than this physical body, than this physical world, that in these moments of challenges and tribulations, what we really want to do is to remember that we are spirits living a spiritual experience that includes a material part to it. And to recognize that we are going to outlive these difficult times for sure, much like we have done in every past incarnation we have ever faced, and any one that we will ever face in the future. We were made for this. We were prepared for this. All our previous lives, all our previous incarnations have led us to a point in which we can move forward, that we have enough to handle all of this. Jesus showed us when he was here with us, right? The main message of his passage through earth was his so-called resurrection. Was he coming back from death to show us that death does not exist? Sometimes for some reason, maybe it's that cortisol speaking, right? We focus on his suffering. We focus on his bleeding at the cross with a crown of thorns, and we think that that's what it is, but it isn't. That wasn't his message. His message is one of joy. The gospel means good news. And the good news is that we are going to overcome everything that we have here. And what I really like about this message in general, and the invitation that he poses us, that I think that there is a great significance in knowing that the first miracle he did, the first extra push he has done, and the 34 miracles we find in the New Testament, is what I call the miracle of joy, is the miracle of transforming water into wine, is the miracle of giving us the sustenance, giving us the fuel to continue to be in this wedding at Cana that we are, that is in this connection with other people, enjoying each other's company, working together, exchanging ideas, learning about our spiritual selves, and understanding that we're all together. We're not separate. For you to be happy, it doesn't mean that I have to suffer. And for me to be successful doesn't mean that I have to take away from you. No, we are at this banquet together. We are this group of people celebrating our union with who we are with spirituality. That's the banquet. And that in that banquet, while we are enjoying ourselves, there's so many people in the spiritual realm and in the physical realm too, working for our happiness, to give us anything that would help us sustain ourselves in a journey, to produce that wine. These spiritual workers are laboring tirelessly for us every single day, and we don't even know about them. Those people close to us from this life and previous lives who are in the discarnate plane are working towards us every single day. We have such an amount of joy and love coming at us at any point in time for us to continue to feel that moment, to feel this opportunity. But we have to learn how to make sure that we take care of our bodies through mindfulness, through prayer, so that we get unstuck from this material challenge of stress that we are facing right now and tap into the beauty that it is to be with other people. Because this second wine that we are given and that we must drink only if we want to, it's been offered to us. Will we drink it? That's the one question. But this wine, it's even better than anything we had before. This understanding of spirituality is even more joyful and lasting than anything we have ever experienced before. This second wine is incredibly delicious. And that's, I think, what we are being invited in this time. When the wine is running out in the world right now, when we are finding that we are running empty on joy, it is up to you and I to take a step back and realize that joy, the miracle of joy, is how Jesus started things. It's how everything else he's done starts. It starts with being in that space of joy, being in the space of happiness. And that as we are invited to drink from that, we will experience incredible differences in our lives. So the first miracle was the miracle of joy. And I think it's a beautiful symbolism for us who are beginning to understand that we are indeed in this banquet and that everything begins with joy. And to be joyous today in the world, it's almost like an act of rebellion, right? The world of cortisol and stress wants us to be bogged down, but we got to refuse that. We've got to bring this joy that Jesus has always spoken to us about. So I hope that in this day and age, when you see so many horrible things happening out in the world, you are reminded that you are incredible just the way you are, that you were made for this, that you're prepared to do this. And there's an incredible amount of people working towards your happiness here and now. That if you take a breath, if you take a moment to center yourself and tap into your spiritual essence, you will remember that you are bulletproof, spiritually speaking. There's nothing that can knock you down a horse. You will never stop being who you are. So let's start with joy. Let's bring joy into this world. Let's give a contribution and make this a better place. And so as you go about your day, I invite you to consider keeping Jesus in mind and remembering that everything he's done, all the incredible miracles that he's done, started with joy. Let's do that too. Let's bring that to our lives. And that's a little bit of our babbling for today. And I toss it back to you, Glaucio.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I liked. I myself, I like two things that you emphasized. The first one was the fact that Jesus' message was not one of suffering, right? Sometimes we relate to Jesus and his suffering, but his message was of happiness, uplifting. The first thing, and you also emphasize the fact that his message is about us making the effort, right? You gotta make some effort. You gotta you gotta at least fill the jars, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. I like those 2 points from your lecture. Very uplifting, by the way. And of course, we have several questions. So I was going to ask if you're ready, but I'm pretty sure you are ready.
Oh, let's go for it. I mean, we can learn together. I not necessarily will have answers. I might have responses, but not answers. Let's try.
Let's check it out. This one comes from MOFSA. How do you see the wedding of Cana related to the woman at the well that occurs a little later in John? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Interesting correlation.
I love that. Yeah, and the woman at the well, like the living water piece, is one of my favorite pieces of the New Testament in general, because I think it has to do a lot with like Jacob's well. I think you might remember this. This is a part for folks who may not be familiar or need a little bit of jostling. This is another passage that later on we find where there's a woman drawing water at Jacob's well, a well that was famous at the time. And Jesus approaches her, which was a no-no at the time, right? Like men talking to an unaccompanied woman, not okay. She was also, I think, a Samaritan. He was not. It was like he was like crossing boundaries left and right on that point. And she says, hey, what's happening here? Why are you doing this? Don't you know better? You shouldn't be doing this. And then he tells her, hey, woman, if you know who I was or who I am, you will ask me for water, because that water that I give you will like quench your thirst forever. I think it has everything to do with that, because if there's nothing else, Jesus was consistent in his message, because his message was about what really matters. And I think that the wine that he is offering here and the water that he offered to the woman at the well there, and the invitation that lingers to all of us, is exactly that. Once we pay attention in the teachings that he brings, and that's not his teachings as in that he owns it, he copyrights it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about he is a messenger of truth and from a divine perspective. And once we begin to drink from that source, God, whatever you want to call it, and we realize that we are spiritual beings, that fulfills us, because that can never be taken away from us. Our homes, our houses, our jobs, our status, our money, all that's going to go. But the certainty that we are loved beyond our own recognition and our ability to fathom at this point in time, and that we are going to live forever because we are loved so much, and that's how we were created, and that we are fated to happiness. It's something that should uplift us and should keep us going. And I think that has a total alignment with these stories that Jesus tells have total alignment, right? Both the first miracle that we talked about, water into wine, and the woman at the well, is an invitation to all of us. And what I really like about the woman at the well too, is that Jesus was going to whoever was there, right? So the woman, like he was breaking boundaries to get there. And here he was also breaking his own planning and saying, I shouldn't be doing miracles just yet, but because Mary interceded for us, she pleaded with so much love, he went for it and he did it, right? So there's help for us in any place we go, in any time and age, and the message is the same. Pay attention to things that are permanent, which, a matter of fact, it's also the message of the Buddha, right? Because the Buddha said that suffering comes from attachment to impermanent things. And what is impermanent? Now we know even better with Spiritism. Impermanent is the physical world. Everything around us is impermanent. The books behind me, the chairs behind me, they're going to fade. They're going to go away. This physical body is going to go away. It's all impermanent. But what is permanent, and Jesus said it so well, is the treasures in heaven. Our habits, our minds, our virtues, those are permanent things. So I think everything is beautifully connected. And, everything that rises must connect, right? It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And you mentioned adaptation, right? So that's also a very interesting point in Jesus' message. Being adaptive, not being attached to the norm. More interesting questions coming up. This one came from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. How can we find the balance between being aware of what's happening around us and being stressed all the time?
Wonderful question. I think that brings an important point too. We're not suggesting that people don't understand or look around the world and see what's happening. That's not what we're saying. Yes to sympathy and empathy. We should understand there are people suffering and there's a role we can play. But what we must not do is be bogged down just by the negative and go into a downward spiral where we are just seeing the negative of things. And I think that while that's happening often in our lives without us even realizing that we are being pulled down by negativity, that we are immersed in this ocean of negativity right now, which makes it harder for us to see joy. And that's why it's an act of rebellion. I think it's important for us to realize that we have wonderful tools. We often talk amidst the Spiritist community about the importance of prayer, but we also use quite a bit of mindfulness in general. Just being present in this moment in time and breaking that cortisol cycle and just saying, take some time for your own mental and spiritual and emotional health by taking a quick minute in your day to just sit and be with yourself and tell yourself, I'm okay right now. In this very second, I'm okay. Because sometimes we get so trapped in the cortisol cycle. So in the words of the world, we can't see. Our mind jumps from place to place. We can't even make a quick prayer. We are just so encumbered by everything. But if we can hold that awareness for a second and say, yes, all of that's happening in the world. And yes, it can be better. But in this moment, I'm okay. I'm an immortal spirit. Breathe. Let your body come down. Let the cortisol go away. Let your inner self shine a little bit more. Drink from the second wine. I think that is a great way to setting us up for the day, that we won't take things as personal. We will understand that we are here to face challenges, right? We came into this life not as a vacation. We should not be expecting to find just joy all the time. We came here to work, and therefore we got to roll up our sleeves and do what we can. So let's have a balance. Let's feel for others, but let's not be dragged down in a way in which we cannot act positively into the world either.
Interesting. The importance of balance. There are more questions. Oh, that's an interesting. That one came from Yasko. Hi, Dan. Great interpretation of this event. Although at first Jesus did not show his intentions to attend his mother's pleading, his mother understood otherwise and acted as if she knew Jesus would change his mind. It seems like the son needing his mother's approval to start his journey. Don't we also need from the ones we trust to love us a little push to start a challenging project, making difficult life decisions, etc.?
Hi, Yasko. Always great to see you and hear from you. I love your input and your perspectives. I do think that Jesus is slightly different, right? He's such an incredible psychological and spiritual level. I do think that he challenged her at that point in time to see how much she really wanted it, right? And I think that's something that we see him doing in the New Testament in general. Whenever somebody comes to him, he, as a great educator, really asked them, what do you want from me? What do you want? Right? He really is challenging to say, be clear about what you want and how you want it. Because sometimes we ask for things that we don't really want, right? So I think that was his way of saying, woman, why are you asking me now? You know that this part it's not up to me, right? But at the same time, I think Yasko's point is really good. This miracle of turning water into wine is the miracle of Mary asking Jesus and saying, no, I really want this. As a matter of fact, you don't have a choice. You got to do this. I know you. I'm your mother, right? And so I think that there's a lot of it there for us to unpack too, symbolically speaking. And I agree. I think that sometimes we do need a little push. And I think that sometimes we also need to listen to others and redirect, right? And make these adjustments. And these are adjustments of love.
It's interesting.
Right? Sometimes when people come to us, they give us the push. They're caring for us. So yes to all of that, Yasko. Yes to making sure that we are hearing other people's opinions and pushing us, but that also we are very clear about what is it that we want, that we do that soul searching and are sure that what we really want is that what we are really going to do.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dan, that Mary did show a certain leadership, and I'll say certain assertiveness in her actions as well, and that was very important.
Oh yeah, not certain, like total, right?
Total.
Like
I mean,
she
sure,
says,
like,
yeah. He goes like, woman, this is not my time. You sure you really want to do it? Like, basically, right?
said, yeah, you're right. She said, are you sure about that?
Yeah, and she doesn't even respond to him, right? She turns to the servants and says, you guys do what he tells you. Like, he is going to do this, right? And the reason why she seems to act bossy, which she's not bossy, is because she knows him. She knows what he is about love and helping others, right? It's Mary, right? She's known him for all. Like, there is no person at that point in time that knows him better on this earth than her. And she knows what he's about. And she knows that her request is aligned with his essence and his mission. She is not asking for herself. And that's a beautiful thing, right? She's not asking, give me more wine. She says, they have run out of wine. Like, do something for them. It's a beautiful request that touches our heart, reminding that our spiritual friends who are way more enlightened than we are, such as Mary, they are touched by our condition and they are running interference on our lives by asking the higher powers to make things better for us. And I think there's nothing more beautiful than somebody asking and giving of themselves to others. Right? It's just a beautiful thing. And in that purpose, knowing that she was fully aligned, she knew that he would not refuse her. And he knew what was coming, right? But still, even with his mother, right, he has to make sure that the intentions are clear, and which is a great thing for us.
Very interesting. Very interesting comment. Additional comments, by the way. We have more. What did you say of those who use the miracle passage to justify the use of alcohol? That's an interesting.
Yeah. What is there to say? What is there to say, right? Like, I think people will bend things to fit their perspectives. I have heard people say that alcohol is a bad thing and you should never touch it. And I have seen people say, well, Jesus drank alcohol. Why not, right? People will use whatever it is that floats their boats. I think what we see here is that happiness and alcohol in general is an okay thing when it is taken responsibly, when it brings joy to our lives. But clearly it was a special moment, right? We don't see them drinking every day. We don't see people falling off their tables or fighting. So it's not so much about the thing itself, it's how one chooses to make use of it. In this particular case, Jesus used the example of wine to symbolize this transformation in this life. And we have to remember too, the wine is sometimes closely attached to life, right? The blood, color of blood, and so forth. There is a bigger symbolism of Jesus giving us life through that second wine. And I think that we didn't talk about this for the fear of making it too long. But what's really wonderful about wine too is that wine takes time to ferment and to come to itself. And I think that spiritual wisdom This transformation that we ought to do is not something that happens like this. It's something that takes time to go from water plus grapes, right? Or grapes to wine. It's just that Jesus helps us speed it up by transforming water immediately into wine. But we are not capable of doing that. We're not capable of doing that jump yet. We have to let the wine ferment so that we can produce wine. So there's a time factor for us there that's no longer present for Jesus, because he's done this, he's gone through that, he knows how it works, but we are still struggling. But from the alcohol perspective, we can't change people's minds. People are going to see what they want to see. If that's what they want to see, that's what they're going to see. And we're going to have to be okay with that. What they do with their lives, it's going to be up to them. But I think what I take away from this passage is that, there are moments for happiness. There are moments in which we can enjoy that peace without going overboard, without harming anybody else.
Interesting perspective. From the U.S. Spiritist Federation, miracles are a notion that have been with humanity forever. Spiritism brings us the idea that miracles do not exist. It's just a fact that we still cannot explain. Many people still struggle with this idea. Can you discuss?
Yes, miracles are a beautiful word in and of themselves, right? I think that there is a certain mystical aspect to miracles that speak to people. I think that during our everyday life, sometimes we feel so lonely and feels like things are not great, that we want to believe in these special things that we call miracles, right? We want to believe that there's a magic in the world, that there is something out of the ordinary. But I think that the more we study the physical and the spiritual world, we learn that there are constant learning going on, right? That there is a constant progression of understanding. And what looks like a miracle today for us may not look like a miracle tomorrow, right? If you take, for instance, like penicillin and the medicine that we have today, if we took the medicine back 500 years, it would be the greatest of miracles. Anesthesia, imagine how has it changed the world. Miraculous, right? And so I think that we come to understand that because we're always growing, always progressing, what seems like a miracle to us is just something that we have not yet fully understand the science and its overall purpose and mechanism. But Jesus, who is ahead of us, not only morally, but intellectually and scientifically, understands these things and knows how to manipulate the elements to make things happen, right? So, and he said to us also in a different part, all that I have done, you too will do. You are God's, right? So it seems to us at this point in time that he's so far away from us. It seems like almost like he's godlike. And I think that's why sometimes people think that Jesus is God, right? Because it's so far from our everyday life that we cannot fathom how he does that. But our take in Spiritism is that miracles are just a special manipulation of things that we haven't learned about yet, but that we will in time, because nothing will remain hidden forever, right? And I hope that that gives us a little bit of oomph to say, wow, there's much for us to learn. One day we'll be able to do that. But I also understand that sometimes people want to believe and hang on to something magical because that reminds them of a presence of God. But I think that both things are not exclusive, right? You can say that there's much to be learned and still marvel in the beauty of the universe and God. You don't have to have just a magic wand make things happen for you to think that there is a God. I think that's what Spiritism does so well, is it gives us this intellectual path to understand how God is marvelous and incredibly beautiful in ways that we can't yet comprehend, but we will. And I love that very much about it.
Yeah, that is very reassuring, that's for sure. One last question for you, please. From MOFSA, can the essence of this teaching be broadened to be shared to compassionate people with a secular perspective? The Dalai Lama approached this in Beyond Religion, Ethics of the Whole World.
Yes, I think so. And I think at the core of all of this, right, it's a larger conversation we can have around religion and religiosity in general. so bear with me. But I think that the idea here that I think is key for me and was quite liberating when I finally arrived at it is this notion that there is a difference that we don't talk about because we don't think about it. But there's a difference between religion and organized religion. There is a difference between our personal relationship with the creator, with the universe, whatever name you want to employ. That I call religion. Organized religion is when we humans come together and make groups to try to practice that connection. And we come out with all kinds of groups and rules and perspectives and so forth. And with time, because we are human, we start excluding and hurting others because we want to feel better than them. That we say, no, you're not good enough. You're only good if you're in my group or whatever it is. And I think that people who have been hurt by organized religion push back and say no to Jesus, no to whatever it is, right? No to religion, not knowing that what they're really pushing back to is organized religion. So I think what the Dalai Lama is getting at is something that Jesus of himself spoke of, which is it's not about sects, it's not about denominations, it's about your personal journey. And my desire, my sincere desire for the world is that people could peel this varnish away from Jesus, thinking that Jesus equals churches, right? It has nothing to do with being a Catholic, a Protestant, a Jehovah's Witness. Jesus is a thing of himself that if we can take the varnish of all these perceptions that we have accumulated over this life and previous lives and just look at his stories for what they are, without that connection, that's when the ethics that we spoke about here in the comment comes in. We start seeing that these lessons are immortal lessons that are really beautiful and powerful, spiritually speaking, and that would apply to any quote, so-called denomination out there, right? And any kind of religion, organized religion out there, because these values that we're speaking about are universal. Spirituality and life after life is something that's not only given to Christians or Spiritists. Everybody's got it. It's just a fact of life, right? So don't put that into one little tent. Just tap into the universal, tap into the source. And that's a really difficult journey to kind of remove all those layers of dust and preconceived judgment that we have brought upon the idea of Jesus and religion in general, right? So and you got to respect if people are not there yet or don't want to do that archaeological work of digging all the layers away from this perceived idea of Jesus, then we got to respect them. But I do think that Jesus has been kidnapped. We have kidnapped Jesus, right? We have put Jesus to serve our purposes in ways that are beneficial to us and that has led people away from really exploring for himself what an incredible and amazing, highly evolved and elevated spirit he is, and how we can benefit from such incredible wisdom, the likes of which we have never had, in this planet since.
Yeah, you mentioned a very interesting point. At least everybody I know of who shies away from this connection with God, with this true religion, those are people who somehow got hurt by experiences dealing with the organized religions. So that was a very interesting comment.
We've been hurt, right? Like we all been hurt, and it's only nice, right? I mean, it's only expected, right? We know that when we are hurt by somebody, sometimes we make judgments about that person, what kind of person they are, what kind of country they came from, race that they are currently in, religion that they have. We make these pieces because we were hurt by those people and say all the people that blank are bad, right? And that's not true. And that's definitely not true. Yeah. And so I think we're in this journey of reminding ourselves, right? Because that's why Spiritism is so beautiful. Today, I am a man that looks this way, born in this side of the world. Tomorrow, I know for a fact that I would not look the same. I might not be a man, and I might not be be born in this part of the world. So it's only natural that we will take different shapes and perspectives. So that's not what matters. What matters is what we do, how we act, our essence, right? Spiritism does that to us, starts to slowly liberate ourselves as we understand the power of divine justice and reincarnation. But it's quite a work to kind of peel away all those layers that we have built over many, many lifetimes. It takes a while for us to deprogram ourselves.
Right. Dan, thank you very much. I mean, I see kudos coming up here. Everybody enjoyed your lecture. It was actually truly very uplifting. If you could be so kind to close with any final comments, any pretty much up to you, right? How you want to finalize. And also, if you want to also, if you'd be so kind to say the final prayer for us, that would be also very appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, friend. It's good to see you.
Here,
even
likewise.
if virtually, I'm looking forward to see you in person, hopefully in our next symposium.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
But I just want to thank the United States Spiritist Federation and anybody who's watching right now. I know that the world can sometimes seem like a scary place. And I understand that people are really frustrated, sad, feeling like they don't have a purpose, and that things and times are rough. And that is true. All of that is true. The times are rough, and sometimes we can feel that way. But what I also want to hope that we can collectively remind each other of is that there is a joy to be had in the world. So much so that the first great doing or interference that Jesus ran on us was to remind us of the importance of transforming the water into wine, transforming what we've got every day, water, into something that takes time and cultivation, wine. And that comes through joy. So I really hope that we can ask for continued assistance from our mentors in the form of our thoughts or actions, that we may find the fuel necessary to continue to move forward in a joyous way, that we may be reminded of the importance of smiling, of being grateful for the many workers who help us on a daily basis, and to bringing our own contribution to this world, bringing our own water. Because when we do, when we bring what we can, spirituality transforms that into something magical. But it all starts with us. And so we ask the spiritual benefactors who are always with us to inspire us, to remind us that we are here for a purpose, that we can and will survive all of this. And in the process of doing that, that we can be kind to each other, that we can be joyful, that we can celebrate good things, even in the world that is suffering and in pain. That us being happy is a way of changing the world for better. So we hope that we may continue to have a chance to do that, whether we are separate physically, whether we are enjoying each other's company, because we know that at the end of the day, we are an incredible big family joined at this banquet, at this wedding of Cana in the universe, where we are celebrating the fact that we are just going to be okay. And in this moment, we are. So thank you for all who are watching. I hope that you bring joy into your lives and watch the miracles that joy will bring into your everyday being.
Announcement here. So we continue with our course, Initiation to Spiritism. Tomorrow we will have lesson, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We will have our 21st lesson. It is going to be about baptism. So a very interesting explanation. So stay tuned tomorrow in the Spiritist, U.S. Spiritist Federation YouTube channel, Initiation to Spiritism. And next week, we have a very interesting lecture in continuation to our series. We're going to have Ligia Carvalho talking about reincarnation. So make sure you stay tuned to enjoy another great lecture. And thanks for watching. Dan, if you could be so kind to say the final prayer.
Yeah. So we want to raise our thoughts up to above and be grateful for all that we have in this moment. Right here, right now, we have a chance to reflect upon what truly matters about our essence. And we are grateful to God and to our spiritual guides, mentors, and benefactors for reminding us that we matter, that we are going to be okay, and that our actions in the world are enough to make things better. So we continue to ask for fuel, for the opportunity to come together and tap into our most beautiful knowledge, this certainty that we are going to survive this physical body, and those whom we love will also survive this physical body. And we hope that more and more we may have a chance to continue to grow our minds and our hearts in the practice of kindness, of love, of collaboration, fraternity. And we hope too that our efforts will make a difference for others. Please, God, let us not forget that everything we do influences the world, and that we are ready for this, that we were born for this, and that we have joy and happiness ahead of us. Thank you for everything that is given to us every day. So be it.